All right, good morning and welcome to the channel. I am running a little bit late this morning. I left my glasses laying around and I couldn't find them. So, all right, let's get started. So, today we're going to be talking about Section 42, but before we do, we're going to do a few introductions. I am the owner of SectionAidConsulting.com, and today I'm going to be educating you guys both from the tenant perspective and the landlord perspective when it comes to Section 42. We need to make some fine distinctions between that of those of you that are applying for vouchers that are on the market and you're trying to utilize those vouchers, and those that have an understanding of low income housing, affordable housing, because all these different phrases mean different things, and I hope that we'll be able to kind of separate those and then discover how they would work from both perspectives. So, getting started, Section 42 is a section of Internal Revenue Service Tax Code. Okay, first and foremost, it provides a low income housing tax credit for investment in certain low income housing buildings. Basically, it allows the property owners to claim an annual tax credit when they set aside a certain number of units, which is an allocation for an apartment building or any other structure or multifamily. For those of you that are low income renters. Now, Section 42 does not fundamentally work like a voucher does because it's not based on income, and we're going to get to that part in just a minute. So, the number of low income units needed for the credit is determined by the total number of units, with a specified fraction of them set aside for those of you that are low income. This means that every unit in the apartment complex or other multifamily property might not be considered low income, but rather there is a mix of market value and low income units. In other words, you could go to a property that could be low income or affordable housing, and it could have a designation for that of seniors or standard market rate, meaning that some of you could utilize a voucher there while others would simply be applying. And the only fundamental issue you need to have is the fact that you're low income. To qualify for low income housing tax credit, which let's talk about that acronym so y'all become acquainted with it. So, low income housing tax credit is LIHTC. And for many, many years, I've just given it my own phrase and I call it LITCH, but it's again LIHTC. A property should have at least 20% of its units set aside for renters with an income that is 50% or less of the area median income. Another acronym that we are kind of getting acquainted with is AMI, area median income. And that area median income could be based contentiously on an entire neighborhood and several zip codes all combined into one. An additional 40% of those units should be set aside for renters with an income that is 60% or less of AMI, and the property must comply with the requirements for a minimum of 15 years or the credits are disallowed. In other words, that you terminate that agreement. And I've mentioned that many times with landlords. Some like to get involved with Section 42 and lease out the property under low income as well as accepting vouchers. But sometimes entering that 15-year agreement is a little bit like selling your soul to the devil, depending on how you're doing it. So I would say that from a landlord perspective, you would probably want to consult with a company like mine before you go out there and put your neck on a chopping block. Okay. So beyond that, the owner may have to pay for back in past credits claimed in previous years plus interest. So basically, Section 42 sets aside a certain number of units in apartment community for those earning less than 40 to 50% of the area median income. Section 42 is a newer program, and I would say it's not that new, well over a decade, but established as part of the Tax Reform Act of 1986. In contrast to public housing program. And again, when we call it public housing program, we're going back to subsidies. So here's where we're going to get into the sticky. Now, we use a wide variety of phrases in the news and other things, okay? So we hear the words low income, affordable housing, Section 42. These all mean the same thing. Okay. And sometimes you're bamboozled when you're out there searching the market and you see a complex. They'll say, oh, we're a low income property. But the reality is they have no relationship with the United States government or HUD, and they're not Section 42. They're just using very clever advertising because there's no law against saying it, and they're just suggesting that they're affordable. It does not mean they're a Section 42 property. And establishing who is or who is not a Section 42 property can sometimes be an arduous process because they don't always post that on websites, and there's not a generally known list. So it does take a bit of a market research to figure that part out. So I'm going to stop real quick and check for questions. I know you guys are probably chitter-chatting here. Shelby, how are you doing? Good morning. How are you? And Sherry Hope, how are you doing today? And Han Solo, great content, Jay. One question on Hakla. When will the result come out? I've been getting mixed signals for that of LA, so I would suggest to you that I don't know just yet. I don't want to get you too hot and bothered about that. So I'll try to check again Monday and see what the situation is with Hakla. All right, so we're going to jump back in here, and we're going to go back to the conversation for Section 42. Looks like I forgot to shave again. I've gotten rather notorious for showing up on my days off and not taking a shave, but that's how it goes. I'm a busy guy, and it's getting harder and harder to make time running a company, plus trying to make videos. It's going to be a bit of a project. So how is LIHTC, or LIHTC, low-income property rent calculated? Unlike other affordable housing options, rents are not determined by income, but rather the AMI, area median income. This means the amount of rent you pay won't change if your income increases or decreases. However, if your income increases after you move in, you'll have to notify the property in writing as soon as possible. You might have to complete a certification process again, and based on your new income to make sure you still qualify. If you no longer qualify, you may or may not be required to move. More than likely, they just won't renew your lease. And depending on the property, the next available unit might be rented at the lower rate to maintain the tax credit requirements. To calculate low-income properties, or LIHTC, there is assumption of 1.5 occupants per bedroom by the tax credit program. So if the average income per city is $50,000 for one person, a household, and $60,000 per two-person household, you might find the average of two amounts. In this case, $55,000. And if the apartment is targeting those that are earning 50% of the AMI, then the income threshold for the apartment would be around $27,500, half. So I'm going to go on and talk about eligibility real quick. To qualify for Section 42, you'll first want to make sure that your income falls within the 30 to 50% of the area median income, and it's going to be by HUD's definition for your area. All right, so half of what everybody else is making fundamentally makes you low income, and there's clearly two tiers. There's low income and very low income. In addition to the income and any assets, such as any savings accounts, stocks, and bonds, we're not counting your China collection and other properties, okay? But actual assets as far as liquidable will be factored in. Personal items like your car, your furniture are not included. The size of your family will also help determine eligibility. The more people that you have in the home clearly is going to change the composition, especially if they're working or receiving Social Security disability, and survivor benefits. All right, I'll take a break because I'm going through this quickly because I know we live in a time and age where everybody likes to get information and they want it in 3 seconds. And so it makes my job even harder because you don't want to make a long video. So looks like we don't have any further comments. So I'm going to go on to the next part, and that's going to be the application process for most of you guys. And then, when I get towards the end of this, I'm going to get into break it down a little bit simpler than that. So but the important thing is you need to understand the fundamentals before we get into the coffee table talk, or we're just talking like we're friends, right? So, so who's eligible for Section 42? To qualify for Section 42, you would first want to make sure that your income falls within the 30 to 50%, again, from HUD's median income limits. And so once you clear that aspect, then you're on the application. Once you've determined that you're indeed qualified, you can apply directly to an apartment community that qualifies for LIHTC. And I would suggest to you that probably the bigger chunk of properties available in every city would be at Look, there are a lot of people that misrepresent. Let me give you great examples. Housing authorities, many of which are not funded that well, they have websites. People that scam are technologically more advanced and they have better websites and often outrank them. Now, if we've got scammers outranking actual websites for housing authorities, how much better can they play the game with low income or Section 42 subsidy properties? A lot better. So I would suggest that you use .govs and also federal subcontractors like affordablehousing.com. To find a lit apartment, you can go to HUD.gov and scroll down to local resources and click on the subsidy apartment search. Follow the on screen instructions to reach the map for your area, then click the properties to see what they offer. For Section 42 units, look for properties that include the term low income housing tax credit because there's going to be a mix of both low income housing and that of properties that would accept vouchers or a mixture of both. When you click on a location map, a pop up will display the apartment sizes, and then it gets into the finer details from there. So, as you can see, Section 42 housing is not a extraordinary application process, but the caveat to this is yes, it's about income. It doesn't care how young or old you are, but preferentially, applicants, and a more discriminating factor is landlords are likely to want tenants that are probably 55 and older, but that's not to suggest every property is trying to violate federal law. But you'll see that's quite, if you're over the age of 55, you probably have a better chance with this. Beyond that, I talk about the differences between Section 42 and Section 8 housing. And I think the real distinction is this one just is based on income. That's it, and they only really assist you with half the rent. Well, the housing choice voucher that could be funded under many things like BA, WA, HOPWA, Section 811, Section 202, and so on. Your rent calculation is based on your income and changes vastly from one house to the next because your household composition is much different. And then, of course, you're utilizing a voucher that would likely pay about 70% of the rent. And of course, you may be waiting on a list and you have to put out a lot of applications. But the caveat, as I was going to mention earlier about low income, which is your Section 42, is you're literally waiting for an ambulance to leave and take somebody out of there because most Section 42 properties have already had the same people there for 25 years. So you're waiting for something to come available. Now, a better way to play the game for Section 42 is to go to city planning and development for a city that you're in, and you'd likely be able to know about new and upcoming buildings that are being built. So you're really actually being very sneaky by doing that because that would allow you to know about a property before they even publish an ad suggesting that they are Section 42. And conceivably, you could go out there and talk to the management before they even publish an ad in the newspaper. And so that would give you a real good chance. And I would suggest doing that over multiple counties if necessary. But get on better with this. To qualify for Section 8, you have to apply through a local PHA, which is your public housing authority. And let's make some clarity on PHA and why they call it a public housing authority. Because when you publicly fund something or you federally fund something, then whenever they do their bookkeeping, it's a matter of public record, which you may request. That's all the P means of that. I call them HAs or housing authorities. I don't really mention the public housing authority part. That's more for you that are old school and been around a minute. And so the distinction for the requirements for Section 42 is that Section 8 is limited to U.S. citizens and eligible immigrants. LIHTC properties or Section 42 may not have the same requirements depending on whether the property accepts other federal funding with immigration status restrictions. And you can ask the property manager, obviously, about their personal requirements for the property. So I think we covered the essentials for this particular part. And I had to actually make notes because we don't deal with a lot of Section 42. When we work with our clients, and again, for those of you who hopped in after the fact, I own Section8Consulting.com. We work with 700, sometimes up to 1,000 clients a year. And when we work with that, we do casework. We're looking at three avenues. Section 42 is obviously one, and Section 42 encompasses what we call subsidies, low-income housing, and affordable housing, and all the other wonderful names they can give it. In other words, you're just simply low income, and that's all that is required if they have availability. Second to that would be dealing with your housing authorities where they have a mainstream voucher that could be funded many different ways. And the most notable ones are the housing choice voucher, which could be funded by Section 811, Section 202. And these are subsections, just like tax code. HUD has its own code, and that would be Code of Federal Regulation. Now, that's your second avenue when you're trying to multiply your efforts to find housing. Your third avenue is clearly Housing First programs, which is continuum of care. It was originally designed and still is more or less designed for homeless, but it doesn't mean you need to be under a bridge. Continuum of care and the Housing First programs around the nation kick out vouchers relatively quick, 30 days, sometimes 60 or 90. And they are now the purveyor or responsible for emergency housing vouchers. In the old days, how PHAs or public housing authorities used to be the ones that handled most of the emergency housing vouchers. Well, that's been relegated down to that program. And so if you're struggling with rent, you're sleeping in the car, friends, family, whatever, then that could be applicable for your situation. It could likely produce a voucher quicker. So how do you want to look at your search, get out there, and then increase your odds, the percentages of which you get? One, Section 42, obviously looking at the properties to see what's available. But I would suggest to you that your number one thing, if you're going to deal with Section 42, whether you be a tenant or landlord. Now, for a landlord, I would say to you that you didn't do your market research, because if you can't support the cost and you don't want to be in a 15-year indentured to HUD or the feds, then it may not be the greatest option. For the tenant, I would suggest to you that city planning and development, or likewise for the city or council or county sponsored services, that you'd want to research those properties. I mean, drive your car down there. Hey, I know this is a weird request. I'd like to know every Section 42 application property that's going to be built in the next year. And you just simply be first out there. You have to be clever in this game. Otherwise, you're going to end up in an old property where it's already filled and you're waiting for somebody to die. I call those clients ambulance chasers, because you're not really chasing ambulance. You just wait for somebody to die to move in. Let's also be clear about one distinction. Section 42, which is LIHTC or LIHTC, that is when you attach funding to the doorknob. When you move into a Section 42 property, it does not come with portability. In other words, it is not a voucher. You apply there, you get that apartment is funded. That doorknob's funded. When you move your stuff outside that door and you go somewhere else, you start again. There is no transferring. However, since it is subsidized and it is under HUD, there is the potential to request you speak with the housing authority to see if your Section 42 could be converted over to a housing choice voucher. Again, you must be clever in the nature and the way that you do this, and then you would be able to gain portability, which would be able to establish you leaving there from the Section 42 property or subsidy, and then being able to port or teleport yourself to another state or even county. So that's another way. So, a lot of this is understanding all the fundamentals as a whole when you're dealing with low-income properties. So what I'm going to do now is one thing that I forgot. I normally always do this. I'm going to put up some information regarding what I do, what my company does. This is not an attempt to sell anybody anything. This is for those of you, and I want to be very clear, this is for those of you that have put in your best effort, okay, and then yielded no result. You're tired, can't sleep at night, things aren't getting done. You researched everything expertly. You've called HUD, you called the housing authority, you called 211. You've yielded no result, and you'd like somebody else to handle your case, then we might be a good fit. However, we only take a limited number of cases, and we do reject a lot of cases, especially when they're young adults. We preferably, dealing with seniors and families and disabled and so on, where it's quite appropriate. So let me see if I can paste that information in for you guys, for those that are clearly, may need that type of assistance, okay? Please keep in mind that at any time you may call the housing authority and get free information. You don't have to pay for that, okay? But the process is arduous and the search is long. And I would say that you should plan for several months. That's nothing about the system is easy, so clearly. Now, what I'd like to do is navigate a little bit away from Section 42 and speak a little bit about some of the other options that are kind of available. We talked about continuum of care. So I would say write that down, Google it, okay? Continuum of care or housing first programs. That can be also another good result for those of you that are being your rent's being jacked up. You can no longer afford it. You can't get an accommodation or modification. And this by virtue is making you almost homeless. It's what we call imminent homelessness. It means that you're being priced out of your own home or the one that you're renting. Okay. For those of you that are more stable that can afford to rent, then you should be considering one thing: HUD home ownership program. Now I realize it doesn't matter if you're 99. I know, but people, seniors always tell me this. Well, Jay, who's going to pay a mortgage at my age? Well, look, if the housing authority is going to require you to take classes, and you can go out there and not get a big head about it and decide you need to live in the biggest house on the block, then the housing authority, let's think about this fundamentally. Whether you're using Section 42, a voucher, or you're using continuum of care or COC, if you're doing it the way that you're currently doing it, it means that you're taking a government subsidy or a voucher and you're paying that landlord's mortgage. Why don't you just go pay your own? Now, this is not for the light of heart because the HUD homeownership program is not offered at every housing authority in America, but I would suggest to you this. If you do that, it gives you much more power. It removes a lot of the power that the housing authority has over you and would allow you to live in a home, a duplex, whatever. And I would suggest getting a property that's inexpensive, cut down, cookie cutter, no, barely any amenities. That way you can get that little mortgage paid off very quickly. Stop spending all that big money. And if possible, move to a state where things are reasonable, out of New York, New Jersey, Orange, LA. Get to the center of the U.S. if it's possible. But I do realize some of you need your family support system in place. So HUD homeownership program is a fourth avenue that I often tell people pursue. And unless you're near death or dying of cancer or something, then that should always be a goal. Is it a perilous pain in the ass to do? Absolutely. Isn't all of this? The federal wheels roll slowly, don't they? So if you're already going through this painful process, you're already making it from one check to the next or one disability payment from the next, then how much harder you've already learned adversity? How much harder could it be to go through about another 5 months of misery to get into a HUD home ownership program where you're paying your own mortgage? Now, why would I suggest that of all things? Well, because that money coming out of that PHA to pay that mortgage, that's equity. And in a year, that equity is your equity. You walk down to the bank, hey, I've got $15,000 in this home. I didn't even pay it. The housing authority paid it. I'd like to start withdrawing it. I'd like a reverse mortgage. Now, when you go out and you get a voucher, you use it with a landlord, that's his money. And he can go get that's his equity. Best deal in America. PHA is paying 70% of your mortgage. But don't misunderstand this as a free ride or a quick one. It's a lot of nonsense to get through it all, because a traditional mortgage and all is one thing, but I would suggest to you that that's going to put equity in there that you could pull on when you get really old. Okay, so it's something you should keep your mind open to. Second, that Section 42, I think that is kind of a means to an end to some degree, but it does do one thing. If you're kind of getting by and you do have a few dollars and cents left at the end of the day, Section 42 could alleviate some of that cost up to 40 or 50%. And any break. Look, if somebody walked along and told you, hey, you know what, it's gonna be half price rent for the rest of your life, can you really argue with that? The only rule is you may not ever, if you go past a certain point, you're no longer low income. You go past the area median income for that area, then you're out. But that's happy around. For those of you that accept vouchers, housing choice vouchers, Section 202, Section 811, all the other subsections to HUD and its Code of Federal Regulation, then that voucher in principle is 70% of your rent. But it comes with a lot of rules, and it comes with a lot of angry people that aren't so pleasant when you call them at the housing authority. Of course, we all know that housing authorities have an unpleasant reputation how they handle people. But that's the price you pay for discounted rent. Now, you get the voucher and you're a high earner at the higher tier, then you may find that most of your rent is not paid by the housing authority. They'll request most of it from you. and then you have a little bitty contribution from the PHA. So is the voucher the best choice of the four? No, not really. The home ownership program would be, in my opinion, the best option because you get somebody else to put equity in that you can draw out. Number two, Section 42 would come in as a second choice because it covers half the rent, and there's some rules, but it ain't so bad, and anybody can apply for it virtually. And then I would say third to that would be COC because it only requires a verbal application, and if you score high enough, then you could potentially gain permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, or emergency housing voucher. As long as you get the PSH or permanent supportive housing or the emergency housing voucher, it's a voucher good for life unless you die, abandon the unit, or violate the law. Now, if you get rapid rehousing, I call it a ticking time bomb because it's only funded for up to 2 years, and there's never a guarantee the nonprofit administering the funds for your voucher is going to pay the next month. So it's a dangerous voucher, in my opinion. See, all vouchers are not created equally, and not all funding is created equally either. I've got clients that believe if they claim domestic violence, that'll shoot them to the top of the list. That might do that, but it also will relegate you and block you out of about 75% of the other available properties because you claimed that one thing. So there's a lot of things in consideration when you're considering what direction you're going to go, whether you're going to go all those directions, and whether or not you're actually taking advantage of the poor way in which the Code of Federal Regulations has been written, or the poor way that maybe they've underwritten policies, procedures, and data manuals that may give you a favorable position to some degree exploit part of that. Is it exploitation? I don't know, but I would suggest to you this: you take something, you read it to the end, and then you read it backwards. That's called reverse engineering. If it's got gaping holes in it, and there's nobody in Congress that's willing to change it, then does that make you a crook? No, it just means that you're very clever. You've identified something, and you're legally making your move through that loophole, which is fundamentally what my business does for a living, is figuring out where they're making the mistake, taking advantage of it legally, and then, of course, trying to send people through the system quicker. So I think those are the four options that you should sit down at the dinner table, think about, put in your very finest efforts to apply, to get out there and see if you can identify Section 42 properties. For those of you that are doing COC and Housing First programs, I would suggest there that an operational manual that is used by their staff would be the likely candidate to help you pass their tests. We keep lots of those around here. Why even lie about that? There's no better way to beat the test than having the teacher's manual, correct? And then fourth and finally is the HUD's home ownership program. I think that's more about endurance, your ability, how much pain can you accept, how miserable can you be before you get through it. Most people that go through the HUD home ownership program that do badly are young, and those that do well are usually my older adults. And the reason they are is because they've got nothing better to do in most cases. They're retired and so on, and they're persistent as hell. They'll call 50,000 times a day. At some point, the lady working at the PHA will snap, lose her mind, and just say quietly, you know what, just give her what she wants, because if she calls my phone line one more time, I'm going to burn the building down. Sometimes being a senior and persistent can be a painful lesson for the housing authority to learn, especially for those of you that don't mind calling every 8 minutes so you get what you want. I know that because I run a business, and there's plenty of neurotic clients, and I quite enjoy them all. But I have to admit, even I get hammered by relentless emails and phone calls from some clients, and if it makes me go a bit crazy, then I can imagine it does the same for those that are out there that are working in the housing authority. So, well, guys, I've enjoyed talking with it. There's no reason for me to carry on and ramble on. I think I've shared what I like to share fundamentally. If y'all have questions, clearly y'all can email or call. And for those of you that have given your best, let me tell you something. I don't want y'all to ever feel ashamed about the research and other things you're doing to help yourself. Not everybody has the money to work with somebody like me or a company, okay? I'm not extraordinarily expensive, but let me just say this. I've got people that are former engineers, people that are retired attorneys that call our office, okay? This is something that's HUD and Section 42 and Section 811, all of them. It takes a steady career of reading and understanding. That's why even the most highly educated people struggle with this. They jump in for a couple of weeks and think they can figure out what I know over a course of 22 years. It's not about your IQ. It's not about any of that. It's about getting out there. You're reading everything, but can you actually apply that? Does it actually work? Do you understand the fundamentals in such a way that you're able to administer it effectively? It's just like somebody's car breaks down and you run down the library, you get a manual. It doesn't mean you're a master mechanic. It means you know how to read a manual. It doesn't mean that you're going to be able to effectively administer that. And then, of course, the third and final tier is, would you be successful in your efforts? And then you would want, and that's why I tell my clients with the big IQs and those that have had these big professional careers that jumping in my world for a couple of weeks isn't going to absolve you of your problem. However, luck is always favorable to everybody, and for those that are the faithful and believers, um, they may find that that is also of assistance to them as well. So, all right, guys, I'm going to wrap it up. I've enjoyed talking with you. We're going to make another video, and we're going to go a little bit more in depth on Section 42, housing vouchers, and the HUD home ownership program, because the information that I'm seeing spread like wildfire across YouTube, a lot of that's just silly. It's nonsense, and as far as I can tell, they don't even have an established career in their field of work. They're just making videos about random shit, and a lot of you guys are gobbling it up as like it's a new reality or a new truth. Most of the people that make videos about Section 8 and other topics related to it on YouTube do not own a company. They'll make a video being a master consultant today, and tomorrow you'll see them picking up trash in a ditch. Okay, be careful who you accept your advice from, because you don't know where they're getting that stuff. All right, guys, I've enjoyed it, and we'll talk again. And I will try to address any questions here real quick that I see. Valerie, hi everyone. Hi to all the animals. No kittens to show you today. Jelly Bean, hi Jay, and welcome. And TLS, we'll call you T Slim, Mr. or Mrs. Jay wanted to say thank you for all you do. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. All right, guys, y'all have a great day. Bye bye.